Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm delighted to open this first event in our new series, Ukrainian Jewish Voices. The Russian war against Ukraine and the enormously challenging situation that this has obviously created for Ukrainians in general and Ukrainian scholars in particular has been the catalyst for this NLI Reading Room series. As we started to look more deeply into the work of Ukrainian scholars, it has become obvious that the rich and high quality Jewish historical scholarship from Ukraine and surrounding countries clearly justifies this series in its own right. Once a month, we will invite a Ukrainian scholar to give a lecture on a Jewish-related subject, and we have the pleasure this evening of hosting historian Dr. Vladyslava Moskalets, who will talk about looking for Yiddishland, Galicia in Interwar Yiddish Travelogues. We'll hear about Polish Jewish writers and journalists who traveled to Galicia and wrote dispatches for major Yiddish newspapers, hoping to find signs of traditional Jewish life inspired by Hasidic culture, but instead found misery, struggle, and widespread neglect of Jewish material culture. These Polish Yiddishists considered the region an ethnographic curiosity and hope to reorganize Galician Jewish life through their literary activism. And the lecture will explore these Yiddish travelogues to Galicia as a rediscovered Yiddishland and shed light on why Galicia remains distinct and somehow exotic and fascinating and intriguing. Vladyslava Moskalets is a historian and lecturer at the Ukrainian Catholic University, Lviv, and researcher at the Center for Urban History in Lviv. In 2011 to 12, Vladyslava was a fellow at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem as a grantee of the Ludmir program by the Jewish Galicia and Bukovina organization. Vladyslava received her Ph.D. in history in 2017 from the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. She was an external collegiate at the Doktoratskolle Galician program at the University of Vienna from 2013 to 2016. And she was a fellow of the Institute for the History of Polish Jewry and Israel-Poland Relations in 2016, as well as a Fulbright Scholar Fellow 2018 to 19 at Northwestern University, Chicago. Since 2016, Vladyslava has been teaching courses relating to Ukrainian and Jewish history of the 19th century, consumption history, and Hebrew. She is a senior lecturer in the Department of History of the Ukrainian Catholic University and coordinator of the Jewish Studies program. And Lada, it is our honor to host you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening to everyone. Shalom. Shalom Aleichem. It is also an honor for me to be here, to be invited by National Library of Israel, because my research wouldn't be possible without National Library of Israel. I used a lot of the resources. I used resources offline, and then when we switched to COVID pandemic world, I used online resources, especially the collection of historical Jewish press. So thank you. Everything is happening because of you. And just a second. I will turn on my presentation. I will start from a small story about Jewish author. His name was Joelle Mastboy. He was a Jewish journalist from Warsaw. And in 1928, he traveled to former Galicia, which was then the region at that time was called already Lesser Poland or Malopolska. And he intended to publish a few short travel reportages from the region in Warsaw Yiddish journal Der Moment, about which I will speak in a moment. And his trip included about 20 towns, both in western and eastern Galicia, both in every area. And one of the places was the provincial town Tarnów, which now is in Poland. It is a part of, and then it was located in western part of Galicia. And at the beginning, he was very disappointed because he came to Tarnów and he looked everywhere. He looked for Jewish life, and he met very acculturated Jewish families, almost assimilated Jewish families who spoke Polish and called themselves Poles of Mosaic faith. However, he paid an interesting he paid attention to an interesting moment that younger generation of these towns is much more attached to Jewish culture, is much more interested in Jewish culture, and they laugh at their acculturated parents, and he looked for this hope in a younger generation. And the story of Joelle Mastboy and his travels inspired me to look a little bit more for other travelogues, for other encounters of people from Warsaw, which used to be in the different country before 1918, and who traveled to Galicia and tried to find something. And here today in our finding Yiddishland, yes. So in today's lecture, I wish to talk about how these people traveled, what they looked for, and what did they found, and what did they thought about it. And at the beginning, I would like to speak a little bit about Galicia. So Galicia, it is an artificial created province which was created after partitions of Poland at the end of 18th century. And we can see here the map of Austro-Hungarian Empire, and here on the eastern part you can see Galicia. If we speak very generally, Galicia was divided by its ethnic composition into parts, into Eastern Galicia, which was populated mostly by Ukrainians, and then Poles and Jews, and Western Galicia. The center for Eastern Galicia was in Polish it's Lviv, in Yiddish it's Lemberg, in Ukrainian it's Lviv, big city. And Western Galicia, with center in Krakow, was populated mainly by Poles, but also included Jews and Ukrainians. After 1918, after World War I, when a Second Polish Republic was established, when Poles received their state, Galicia ceased to exist, not only as a separate province, but also as a name, because Polish state wanted to integrate all the territories. So it was before the war. It was partitioned between two countries: Prussia, Russian Empire, and Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And new Polish state wanted to integrate all these areas, and they used a name Malopolska, which means Lesser Poland. So there is a Wielopolska and Małopolska. And they used this term officially, but we see in these travelogues, which I will be talking about, people continue to use name Galicia. Galicia it was, as I mentioned before, it was an artificial province, was something created at the end of 18th century, but it managed to become very vital, very long-living entity with very strong Galician identity, and full of Galicianers, about whom we will speak in a little bit later. And here we can see a map how many Jews lived in Galicia. So Galicia was very densely populated with Jewish people, and I think a lot of these names which you can see on this map, you heard about them because they are famous in Jewish culture. Different Jewish writers come from the area. And it was a place of Jewish culture. And the main centers were, besides Lviv, Lviv, Lemberg, and Krakow, were Brody, which was located on a border between Austrian-Hungarian Empire and Russian Empire. Big industrial center in Drohobych and Boryslaw. Tarnów, and also centers of Hasidic rabbis in Chortkov or Belz, which are here. And Jewish population was important for Galicia, and it was for people who are not from this area. They were interested. They wanted to look for Jewish population and wanted to understand them. And my sources are a few major newspapers which were published in Yiddish, in the interwar period. So interwar period was a good time, as you probably know, for Yiddish culture, and we can observe this growing number of publishing houses and libraries, and also newspapers, which used to have a high circulation and which used to have a correspondence in different countries. And I speak about New York newspaper Forwards, which exist until now, not in the paper. Now it exists only in online version, but it used to be published in paper version for a very long time. Newspaper and Warsaw newspapers, 3 Warsaw newspapers, Hind, which means today, Der Moment, a moment, and Literarische Blätter, literary pages. All of them were founded, almost all of them, most of them were founded before World War I, but they became famous. They became they got this high circulation after the war, and also all of them had their own agenda. Mostly, I would say, socialist or folkist agenda, and since they wanted to attract attention of the audience, they, besides news, besides political analytics, they used to publish travelogues. Travelogues was a popular genre in all newspapers in different languages. We have travelogues in Polish language, and we used to have Polish Jewish newspapers published in Polish language. But here in my talk, I would like to focus on Yiddish newspapers, because I feel that it's a theme. It is not neglected, but it can be researched more. And I will speak about few authors, focusing mainly on Joelle Mastboy, about whom I will speak in a minute, because I will explain why, who published a book of his travelogues called Galicia in 1928. But also there are other people who are important writers. One of them, his name was Litvin, was not very famous author, who published a book Yiddish and Shomes, Yiddish Souls, Galicia, about his travels in 1917. Shimon Ansky, very famous author who authored the book Yiddish Play, and who traveled into Galicia from Russian Empire in 1915, and who observed Galicia with his eyes of Russian Jew. And Israel Joshua Zinger, famous author who was a brother of Nobel-winning Jewish author Itzhak Bashevis Zinger. Yes, so he published in Forward in these New York newspapers, and under the surname Cooper. And he traveled, so he tried to describe Galicia to people in America, to Jews in America. And another author from Warsaw, Nachman Meisel, who published his reportages in Literarische Blätter, in literary journal. And mostly I will focus on my favorite author, whose name is Joelle Mastboy, because so he's my favorite because he collected his reportages. He published them in newspaper Der Moment, and he collected them into one book. And he was very, very interesting, very talented person. He was not, almost all of these reporters, none of them actually was from Galicia, so they had this outside perspective on what is going on. And he lived in Warsaw, then he moved to Tel Aviv. Literary critic Zalman Reisen described him that he has a fine ear for the dark world of sounds, images, smells, and colors, and in the wild mixture of naive childishness and sophisticated modernity, there are pulses, a real or long dreamt of life, expressed in a many-colored mosaic of memoirs, experiences, dreams, and visions. Joelle Mastboy was a fiction writer. Most of his books are fiction, so he had this beautiful way of describing everyday life, and he focused on very wide range of themes. And here is again map of Galicia, and here are some locations, almost not some locations, all of the locations I managed to find in my research in the travelogues. So they included mostly Eastern Galicia because, as I said, it has this higher density of Jewish populations. Included, I put here them in Polish, the Polish language. So Lviv. Industrial area of Drohobych and Boryslaw. They were very much interested in borderland, in Brody, border with Russian Empire, and also a place of Snyaten and Zaleszczyki, which was on the border then in 1920s with Romania. And they tried to observe what happened to places which and what happened to Jews who appeared from the different sides of the border. And as it comes to Western Galicia, they also used to visit Kraków was the main point, but also Nowy Sącz, Gorlice, Tarnów, Rzeszów, Leżajsk, and so on. It is very interesting, and that people. Joelle Mastboy, this division between Western and Eastern Galicia are very important for him, and he emphasized them all the time. He compares Kraków to Lviv. He compares people from Eastern Galicia to Western Galicia, and he says that people from Eastern Galicia are more emotional. Jews from Eastern Galicia are more emotional and more lazy, and people from Western Galicia are not so lazy, but they used to they lack initiative and they need to be organized by someone. It is very subtle difference. It doesn't matter to anyone, I think, beside Poland, but he tried to understand them. But of course, the main thing it was for them was to understand this difference between Galicianer, people from Galicia, from people from territories which before the war were under Russian Empire. Okay. When we look at these reportages, when we look at Jewish reportages in general, we can see one important feature. It is a so-called Jewish geography. So they travel in Jewish places. They try to they look at everything from a Jewish perspective. Galicia was multicultural, had a multicultural composition. Mostly it looked, you had Poles, Jews, and mostly Poles and Jews in the big cities, and mostly Ukrainians in the countryside. And when these authors, when they speak about it, when they travel, they look at Ukrainians and Poles, but they try to understand them. How does it matter for Jewish people? One of the very interesting example for me was example by Soskes, by reporter Soskes, who traveled to Ternopil. Ternopil itself is the end of Galicia. Yes, it's very far. I will show you on a map. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, so Ternopil is here. It's called in Polish Ternopil. So he traveled to Ternopil and he listened to Ukrainian songs. Ukrainian girls singing after work in the evening, and he is amazed by Ukrainian song on the one thing. They remind him Myrhorod, Poltava, and Nizhyn, cities in the east, cities in the former Russian Empire. However, he cannot separate these feelings from the traumatic memory of Khmelnytsky uprising. Khmelnytsky uprising, which used to happen like a few centuries before his trip to Galicia. And he feels guilty about his fascination with Ukraine. And he said, why do we forget about Khmelnytsky and would not stop like to hear musical sounds of Ukrainian fields? So when these authors, when they perceive perceive multiculturality, they still try to understand what does it mean for Jews. Another thing is picking Jewish places in Jewish location in unusual places. For example, they go to Carpathian mountains in the interwar period become a very popular resort for Poles, like a Riviera, or not Riviera, mostly like Switzerland, like a small Polish Switzerland. However, these authors, they don't look for tourism. They try to find roots of Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of Hasidism, originally from Podolia, and they go to the places like this place. I took a picture. I found a picture for you. It's like a place where Baal Shem Tov used to have his meditation and used to spend his time in seclusion. It's located in Carpathian. Carpathian, in general, it's not a Jewish place. Like it was populated mostly by Ukrainian peasants. But still, these people, these authors, they try to go there, try to find something Jewish. When you go to Brode, they try to think about Broderzinger. Broderzinger was a famous Jewish ensemble from beginning of 20th century, klezmer musicians. Or they visit Hasidic courts, which was very popular. So they focus on the Jewish geography, and it's very interesting for me because I was familiar with Polish perspective, with Ukrainian perspective on Galicia before, and looking at Jewish Yiddish reportages, it opened for me like it's like a whole different country. It was very interesting. Another feature which is very noticeable in most of the reportages, so they happen 10 years. They were written in 1920s, 1928, after World War I. And we can see this big influence of the war and this big trauma people encounter. So here you can see the postcard from Drohobych. It's a postcard of houses burned by Russian army because Galicia was occupied by Russian army in 1915 for not for a very long time, and it encountered some big devastations, and so it was commemorated later by this kind of postcards with destructions, and that's something similar to what people in what these reporters are noticing and encountering. So they visit war memorials. They ask people what happened to them after the war, and how somehow they explain that Galicia looks like it looks. It has its problems because of the war. So, for example, they visit Joelle Mastboy. He visited town Zalishchiki, a very touristic place, which used to have a wine trade before the war, and then it has connection to Russian Empire. And after the war, everything broke up, and they are had to turn into petty traders. And Joelle Mastboy, he speaks to these people, and they complain how everything was lost. Or he visits Jewish magnates, Jewish nobility, Baron von Hammer in Carpathian, in Skole, and he speaks to him about everything terrible which happened when Russian occupation happened, and when the Russian soldiers very brutally whipped the Baron. Also, but war, on the other hand, it becomes the moment of division between old Galicia and new Galicia. And authors, they speculate how this new Galicia in new Polish state will look like. Again, it's not a feature of every reportage, but it's a feature, definitely feature of reportage of Mastboy, this attempt to show how social and culturally Galician Jews were. So he doesn't focus only on Jewish communities. He tried to find this big diversity, and he tries to show that Jewish people live in very different way, and they do very different things. And also, I think it's very useful to read this travelogues right now, because we have a lot of stereotypes about Galicia, about Galicianer. We have a lot of stereotypes about how Jews were all engaged in trade and so on. And when we read this reportage, you see this very, very multicultural Jewish life. So he managed to find Jewish peasants in Carpathian, about whom I will speak a little bit more. He goes to industrial places like Drohobych, Boryslav, Kolomey, Krosno. He goes to factories and he speaks to Jewish workers, and he tried to understand why they became workers and what does it mean to be Jewish workers. Are they engaging in labor movement and so on. He found Jewish nobility because a lot of Jews were engaged in lumber trade in Carpathian, so it was common for Polish Carpathian, but also for this Romanian part, and they became extremely acculturated, and they often received this status of nobility, and he tries to find them, he tries to speak to them and observe them. For him, it's something very unusual. He goes even further and he finds Jews who converted to Christianity, and he tries to understand why they converted to Christianity. What does it mean to be converted? And he found, for example, he finds a family in Lemberg, in Lviv, where there is a mother and a daughter, and daughter converted to Christianity. But because of the poverty, because of economic reasons, she continued to live in one apartment with her mother. And he interviews them and tries to understand what does it mean. He finds Frankists. Frankist movement, it was a heresy in 18th century. There is a famous book by Olga Tokarczuk. I heard that Olga Tokarczuk has a presentation today, so perhaps. And I hope her book was translated in English, and she won Nobel Prize last year, I guess. So she wrote about Jakub Frank and his heresy. And Joelle Mastboy manages to find Frankists in a small town, very unknown town, Hlyniany, near Lemberg. They tried to hide their identity, but they continued to be Frankist after all those years. Of course, Joelle Mastboy, and I think everyone tried to look for Hasidim and try to understand how war influenced Hasidic movement and Jewish intellectuals, about whom I will speak later. And so Hasidim, there are in visitors, reporters who visit Galicia, Joelle Mastboy and also Joshua Zinger, they went to two major places at Belz and Chortkov, which were places of Hasidic court. And here we can see Hasidim from Hasidim of Belz, who are very prominent right now, and who still have their location in Belz in Ukraine, and they restored mikveh, and they continue coming there, and Hasidim Hasidic movement was something which engaged very much Jewish audience of Yiddish newspapers. So these authors who were very secular, very distant from religion, they still tried to go to look how everyday life in Hasidic court looked like. And there was this big difference between Belz and Chortkov, because Chortkov suffered very much from World War I, and Hasidim of Chortkov, they left Galicia and they lived and they didn't return, and court looked very much abandoned. But Belz flourished, and they tried to explore this Belz court, what people do eat, how they live. And somehow we see this a little bit patronizing view of the secular intellectuals from New York and Warsaw who look at the Hasidim. But on the other hand, they try to talk, and they try to talk not only to men but also to women. And Joelle Mastboy includes a conversation with Rebbetzin, an essay about Rebbetzin in Belz. The second very unique thing is the fate of Jewish workers in Boleslav, but not only in Boleslav. It attracted attention. It attracted a lot of attention. So Boleslav was a center of Jewish oil industry. Galicia used to have oil industry. It was like the only big and actual industrial location, and but the peak of its activity was before World War I, and in 1920s it looked already not very good. It did not bring much profit, but it was very famous, and it was famous also because it employed Jews as workers, which was something unusual for in these eyes of stereotypes. The Jews only engage in trade, and Jewish reporters tried to go there and speak to Jewish workers and understand what does it mean and why do they engage in labor movement and so on. And they had this very pessimistic view what's gonna happen to Jews there, because the industry was in bad situation, and Jewish work, if you were a Jew in the time, you were also not in good situation because of lack of prospects, because of they were not very well qualified. But somehow for this correspondence was very important to show how Jewish cultural life is flourishing in these places, in these industrial cities. So they go and visit Nachman Meisel, a man from a reporter from literary journal. He goes to Breslau to explore Jewish theater, and he sees Jewish workers who come to Jewish theater, and he says the economic situation looks bad, but cultural situation gives us some hope for the future. And one of the most unusual things, which was very exciting, it was Jewish peasants. This picture I used as an illustration is not a picture from Galicia. I apologize, I didn't find, we have no picture from Galicia, but we have picture from Transcarpathian region. It's a photo by Roman Wishniak, and who visited Jewish villages where Jews used to live, but perform in agriculture, not in trade, or not only in trade. And Joelle Mastboy, he did the same. He went to Snaten, a small shtetl in the south of Galicia, and there he went to a market. And in the market he saw, as he called him, Hutzul. Hutzul is Hutus are, it's like a sub-ethnic group of Ukraine, but this Hutu, he spoke Yiddish, and he started speaking Yiddish to him, and this man invited his name, he has a nickname, Pesach Baba, and this Pesach Baba, he invited Joelle Mastboy to his home, and for Joelle Mastboy, this mixture of how do you live if you are Jew, if you continue be immersed in religion, in Judaism, but you live in a very non-Jewish environment. What does it mean? And he met daughters of the Jewish peasant who were singing Ukrainian songs, but he also visited he also visited them on Shabbos. So Shabbat was how they continued to feel attached to Jewish culture. And so if I want to sum up this three small cases, this diversity was something which excited these intellectuals, this author, very much. And how if you speak on Galicia in general, you can see that this myth of Galicianer as a very distinct man from Russian Jew was born after the encounter of both during World War I, and also after this continuing encounters in the interwar period. So here we have a quotation from Szymon Anski, who visited Galicia during World War I. He was from committee, philanthropic committee, which helped Jews who suffered from the war, from World War I. And he said about Galician Jews like this. The Jews of Galicia looked at the enslaved and disenfranchised Russian Jews with a certain reluctance. They could not understand how one can live and breathe in an atmosphere of pogroms, hostility, and terrible persecution. So Galician Jews usually perceived Russian Jews as suffering, so it's a country of pogroms, and pogroms didn't happen in Galicia. Actually, they happened in few cases, but we have this stereotype, this idea of Galicia being a peaceful country. And Russian Jews, in turn, viewed Galician Jews from top to bottom as backward, uneducated masses, far from cultural life and devoid of any aspirations. The main problems that authors notice about Galicia, the main problem is poverty. Is also why they notice poverty, because almost all of them are socialist. They come from socialist political milieu, and they go to these places where usually people do not go. So they go to very poor towns, and they try to speak to. They try to speak to poor people, to beggars. They describe these beggars, and they try to explain why Galicia is so poor, why we have this problem. And as I said before, one of the explanations was the war, which was not actually very true, because Galicia was poor in the end of 19th century, and this poverty caused a huge migration toward the United States. But poverty is like this main context. And the second thing is something which is not very obvious. It's a criticism of the excessive acculturation of Galician Jews. So for Poles and Ukrainians, Galicia Jews were not sufficiently acculturated, but from Jews from Warsaw, they were acculturated too much. They spoke German language, they read German books, they went for education to Vienna, and they were not from the point of view of this Yiddish authors, they were not interested in this Yiddish culture enough. And when they come to different places, they notice how they try to look for some groups, for Yiddish newspapers, and for interest in Yiddish culture, but they don't find it. One of interesting example is, which is also very interesting if you look in the modern context, is when Joelle Mastboy comes to Tluste. Tluste was the shtetl where mother of Baal Shem Tov, of founder of Hasidism, was buried. And so he went to the cemetery and he found a tomb of a mother of Baal Shem Tov, but it has very broken and destroyed matzeva, tombstone. And Joelle Mastboy visited local Jewish community, and he said, look, you have this cemetery, and you have the very famous person buried there, but the cemetery is a terrible situation. Why don't you do anything about it? And they say, if you care about it, you can do it. We don't care. We are not interested. And this neglect of material culture was something which surprised him, and he could not understand why Jewish communities don't care about their own culture, which of course was not only his concern. We had there were organizations in Galicia, in Interwar Poland, which try to do something about it, but sometimes successful, sometimes not very much. And the first Jewish museum in Lemberg, it appears at the same time because of because intellectuals are afraid that Jewish communities don't care enough about Jewish culture. And also the thing which they notice is the decay of Hasidic centers, which happens because Hasidim move towards larger cities, or they move abroad, and these places which were important ones, like Chortków, are in decay. But we see this Joelle Mastboy, he tried to conceptualize what he saw, and he he paid attention about the generational difference I mentioned at the beginning of my lecture, and he summed up it in his final essay. So he said, here is an old Galicia with a molded pale Jewish intelligentsia, with German crawling manners. I don't know what German crawling manners mean, but it was a thing then. This intelligentsia is lazy and backward, detached from yesterday and estranged from today. However, there is the youth, which feverishly tries to get out of the dark assimilationist fog and thinks with all its efforts about Jewish cultural life. So their impression from Galicia was not so much pessimistic at the end, because they believed that there is a younger generation, and they believed in their own messianic role. So these intellectuals who came from Warsaw, or who were educated in Warsaw, or came from New York, they believed that they will bring this organization, this initiative to Galicia. And so Joelle Mastboy said, in general, young Galicia is following the path of truly Jewish life. But one cannot strive and neglect in this beautiful Jewish group. There is a lack of organizers and practical hands. Give us your hands and we will give you our will, says a friend from Galicia to me. So in his opinion, Galician Jews ask for this initiative, ask for organizational help to nurture their own Yiddish life and cultural life. And for these people, for these reporters, culture is Yiddish culture. Yes, so Yiddish is the most important thing. And then we could do a lot. We would be a significant force. This is, in fact, the best time. So they believe that 1920s is the moment where Jewish people from different parts of the Polish country can be united under the Yiddish, under the umbrella of Yiddishist culture. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you for listening, and I think I have to stop sharing my screen. Yes. I will be very grateful for questions and also for any comments, or perhaps you have ideas, names which I didn't mention, and I can use in my future research.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moskalets. There is a question from Leopold. He said, officially, this province was called, okay, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this, Królestwo Galicji I Lundmeri. Is that something that's, okay. What exactly was Lundmeria?
It's, okay, it's some linguistic moment. So now it's Volhynia. Volhynia, it is, sorry, I closed my my PowerPoint. Perhaps I can share it again. So it's Volhynia, but a former name of Volhynia was under the name of Ruthenian medieval knight Volodymyr, and it was called Volodymyria in the 13th century, and then Poles made it. I can see. Oh, here, Volhynia. So they shortened the name Volodymyria to Lodomeria. So it's just how Polish people interpreted former names. So yes. So when Austrians took a part of Poland, the Austrian Empire took a part of Poland. They have to justify it somehow. And they justified it by claiming that they have rights to medieval country, medieval Galician kingdom, and this Volhynian kingdom. And so they could not just separate part of Poland. They had to have some excuse. So this was an excuse, and they tried to foster this idea of longevity, that we didn't come from nowhere. We didn't just occupy you. We took a part which belonged to us originally. That's it.
Thank you very much. Mitchell asked, did you encounter any mention of the shtetl Strelisk or Streliska?
No. I had this map, and it was mostly, yes, all the states I encountered, but of course I didn't check all of the newspapers. They are they are very big they were published every day. So perhaps there was someone who traveled there, but I don't know about this.
Thank you very much. Eugene asks, would you not agree that Galician or Ukrainian Jews were and are today subject to persuasive anti-Semitism, not limited to Russian activity?
They were subject to anti-Semitism. They were subject to, yes, to some anti-Semitism, but the relation, the position of Jews in Galicia, it's a long story. It differed from how when Habsburg, from the end of 18th century until the end of Galicia. So we speak about the story of Galicia. It's a story of a little bit more than 100 years, and there were different periods, different groups who tried to deal with Jewish population. So we have official Habsburg politics, which was on one hand it was emancipating. On the other hand, we can consider some of their activities anti-Semitic because or biased towards Jews. For example, attempts to forcefully educate them in German, or made compulsory recruitment or something. So we have but in 1867, Franz Joseph, the Kaiser of Austro-Hungarian Empire, he emancipates Jews. He makes them equal subject of the empire, and they became. They could engage, for example, in politics. They have equal rights. So on the position of state, they had equal rights, and there was no such discrimination in the Russian Empire. But of course, Jews live in this situation where you have also two rising nationalist movement, and they also have nationalist movements. So we have like three national movements: Polish, Jewish, and Ukrainian, and we have all of these different combination periods where they solidarize, or when they do not solidarize with Jews. So it's like a theme for another set of lectures, but I think we speak about this subjective view, a subjective point of view of Jewish reporters, and one of them is Joshua Zinger. So he comes by train. He describes how he is coming by train from Warsaw to Galicia. And he says when he crosses the border to Galicia, when most of the people are locals, he sees this transformation and change of the attitude, and then no one is trying to look at him and decide if he is a Jew. No one, like he says, no one is looking at your nose. It is very subjective, and it is very funny. I mean, he could be in another train and encounter another feeling. But that's how these reporters, they indeed perceived Galicia as more liberal and more and country where Jews, not a country, area where Jews could live more peacefully. But yes, and we had war, we had like different other disruptions. So this picture is subjective and not fully presented, but that's how they felt it.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Judy writes, thanks for a wonderful presentation. Could you explain whether there was a crossover where Jewish writers were accepted into general culture? Bruno Schultz, for example, what does this say about the status of Jews in general society?
We have in Galicia, we have numerous authors, not numerous, but we have few prominent authors, very famous now, who are part of this non-Jewish literature. And one of them is Bruno Schultz, and Another one is Josef Roth, who was from Brode and who also who wrote in German, but who also visited Galicia and wrote his reportages. So in my article, I write a little bit more about. I try to compare this Yiddish reportage and German, like Yiddish language reportage, German language reportage, and so on. But I would say that I think Josef Roth would have been criticized by my Yiddish reporters because of his assimilationist tendency. So they would call it that he wanted to assimilate, who went too far from Jewish tradition and became this part of Polish and German culture very much. I would say that how they were accepted by non-Jewish society in 1920s, in 1930s, they were accepted. They could, but even we have example of another author, Deborah Fogel, who is female, who wrote in Yiddish and in Polish. She was a poet, and she was also essayist. She lived in Lemberg, and she published in this Polish newspapers. And she was considered. She had this Polish version of her name, Deborah, and he has a more Yiddish version of her name, Dwoyer. But at some point, people could encounter some anti-Semitic like mentions. I don't know about Deborah Fogel actually, whether she encountered it. She was murdered then in Shoah. Yes, so like these people were then murdered in Holocaust, and that's how we know about them. So we know that their story ended very tragically. Interwar Poland is polarized society. You have a very different tendency. You have newspapers which would accept Jewish author. You have newspapers which are very chauvinistic. And I would say that one could find a place for himself or for herself in this culture, in this Polish culture, which we see mostly in Warsaw. So Galicia was not a big, not a big prominent place of this literary culture, unlike Warsaw. But there existed some bias.
Thank you very much. There are many compliments in the chat. I'd like to read one to you, written by Yonina. She says, Dr. Moskalets, it is so heartening to listen to a young person speak so familiarly about a period of time that many older people have no interest in speaking of. Thank you so much for sharing your work and your knowledge with us. There are more compliments, I just won't read them out loud. There's a question that I'm going to make mistakes in pronunciation. I apologize in advance. It's a question by Deborah. She says, what about Transcarpathia, Munkats, and Berigs? I'm not going to be able to pronounce this. I'm sorry. I guess it's 3 places that she's asking about for you to mention.
Yes, I'm very much interested in Transcarpathia, and actually I'm now preparing an article about this image of Carpathian in Jewish culture. So I told you before, so Carpathian was not a place where so many Jews lived, but it became famous. It became important. Carpathian Mountains. It became important for people who because of this connection to Baal Shem Tov, to Hasidism, and. Transcarpathian area is extremely interesting area. It's very different. So you speak about Munkach, Baraksas, and so on. I guess Baraksas, which is now Barahovo, because it has different dynamics of Jewish life, and Jews were much more integrated in this neighboring culture. So I showed you this picture by Roman Wishniak about Jewish peasant. Yes, so Jews who engages in agriculture, and they engage in all crafts and activities. I didn't find reportages in Yiddish about this place, so I found some few articles, but there is a wonderful reportage by Czech author his name is Ivan Olbracht. I don't know whether it was translated into English or other. It was translated into Ukrainian. It was published originally in Czech. So he traveled at the same time about which I speak, 1920s. He traveled to Transcarpathia and he lived in a village called Kolochava, and he visited all these places. So it was a time when Transcarpathia became part of Czech Republic, and he writes a lot about Jews. So he writes a lot about Jew, and he also wrote a novel which is called Galut in the Valley, Galut like diaspora, and he tried to understand this Jewish people. So he was very critical of Hasidism. People from Warsaw were excited about Hasidism, about this exotic culture of Hasidim. Ivan Olbracht was a communist, like harder communist than these Warsaw authors. So he spoke. He wrote about this big impact of Hasidic rabbis in Transcarpathia and how they are exploiting poor Jews, Jewish workers, and so on. It's extremely interesting read. I recommend it very much because he was also he was Czech, but he was critical to this Czech presence in Transcarpathia. He didn't go to this Hungarian part, so I don't know much about Hungarian part, and I think it's better to find someone who speaks Hungarian, who reads Hungarian, and I'm sure there were Hungarian text, but we have also a lot of pictures from Transcarpathia taken by different authors. So pictures of reporters, and I know a person who researches these pictures, and who lives now in Ukraine and who publishes them on his Facebook, but who does the research about how and there are plenty of Yiddish, plenty of Jewish pictures, and very interesting. It's very interesting area, and I think it's a problem that it was not researched well enough. Because of language problems as well. I don't know Hungarian, so even it's like another language you had to learn, another context.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moskalets. After Karen's closing words, I will open microphones so people will be able to say thank you personally or ask any further questions or comments. From me, thank you very much. Laila Tov. Karen.
Thank you so much, Lada. This has just been a fascinating window into the nuances and the diversity that I think has been so enlightening for everybody here. So definitely when you were mentioning before that some of our questions would lead to even more lectures, I think we'd be very happy to find ways that we can listen to more of the results of your research in uncovering these very fascinating writings. Some people have written to me personally, and I can see Doron wasn't able to get through all of the specific questions. And I know that some of you might be looking at finding out more about places that Dr. Moskalets may have come across in her research. So I'm just going to post my email address here, and if any of you want to write to me, then with your permission, Lada, I will forward their emails so that you can maybe give them a more specific response that they would appreciate. So here's my email address, and I'll be happy to help and pass on any other inquiries. And thank all of you for your wonderful comments and for your interest, and do stay with this series. On June the 6th, we're going to be featuring Nadia Ufintseva, who's going to be talking about Jewish printing houses in Ukraine. So you're invited to join us for that and for the other series, but wishing you all good night and all good wishes to colleagues who are connected or are in Ukraine listening to this lecture. Laila Tov, and thank you very much.
The microphones are open.
Thank you so much for the interesting presentation. It's a subject I don't know much about, so everything is interesting and really it's brought with a lot of nuance, I think. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very nice to hear so many compliments. And yes, I saved the chat for me, so I will read them later. I cannot read them all right now, but thank you.
Once again, thank you all for being here. Laila Tov from Jerusalem.
Laila Tov.
Bye-bye.